Welcome to Blue Nile. We hope you are enjoying solving past questions with us. Let's take a look at a big question. We are going to look at a question called Bonsai Trading. This is question 2 from the June 2015 exam and is for 10 marks. This question covers internal control systems and tests of control. Both areas are within the control systems area of the syllabus. Remember, when planning your answers in the exam, to remember to allocate 1.8 minutes for every mark. This question should take you no more than 18 minutes. To successfully complete this question, you will need to plan your answer taking care with the time allocated to each part of the question. Use the scenario where needed, and have clear and efficient communication. It may be worth pausing the video at this point and printing off the exam question. That way you can follow the scenario as we talk through it. Let's break down the requirements. The question is split into two parts. Part A is at the top of the question before the scenario begins. It has no relevance to the information in the scenario, as it requires knowledge from your studies to answer it. It asks for you to identify and explain the 5 components of an entity's internal control. This question is for 5 marks, and therefore roughly 9 minutes should be spent on this. Part B is underneath the scenario. It therefore requires the scenario to be used to answer it. It asks for you to describe a test of control, which the auditor of Bonsai Trading would perform to assess whether or not each of the non-current asset controls listed above is operating effectively. This is also for 5 marks, and therefore around 9 minutes should be spent on this. Let's now begin to structure our answer. Part A requires us to identify and explain 5 components of an internal control system. ISA 315 provides the auditor with this information, and your knowledge of this standard is required to be able to answer it. To remember the 5 components, I use crime. C is control activities. R is risk assessment. I is information systems. M is monitoring of controls. And E is control environment. Control activities are the policies and procedures that ensure the management's objectives are carried out. These include procedures such as physical controls, authorization, or approval and segregation of duties. Risk assessment is the process of the entity's management being able to identify risks relating to the financial statements. The entity should be able to identify, prioritize, and decide what action is needed for each risk identified. Information systems are those procedures and records to be able to identify and understand how the financial system works. This includes the accounting system. Monitoring of controls is the process of ensuring control systems are able to cope with the entity's demands. With regular monitoring, they can identify if a system requires any changes before it affects the strength of the control. Finally, control environment looks at the overall ability of the entity to ensure control is strong. It looks at the management's attitude, awareness, and actions with regards to controls within the entity. The idea is if the management are enforcing a strong control environment, then those working for them will adopt similar attitudes. Our 5 components have now been explained, so it is now time to move on to the scenario and Part B. Part B requires us to describe tests of control for each of the controls listed for non-current assets in the scenario. They have been clearly set out in the scenario. The aim is to read through it and decide how the auditor would be able to test whether these controls actually happen and are effective. For 5 marks, we need 5 control tests, and 5 controls have been identified for you. Remember, for each audit procedure, whether it be a substantive or control procedure, we must ensure the test is written as a clear instruction, detailed enough, so it explains what the auditor should do and why. The first control is that Bonsai has a capital expenditure committee, and for all purchase orders of capital items, there needs to be authorization from the committee. A control test could be, for a sample of asset purchases in the year, inspect the purchase orders and verify whether the asset has been authorized by the committee by reviewing for an approved signature. The next control is that on receipt, each asset is assigned a unique serial number, and this is recorded on the asset and in the non-current asset register. A control test could be, for a sample of non-current asset additions in the year, inspect the asset for the serial number and agree the serial number to the non-current asset register. The next control is when the asset arrives. A goods received note is completed, which details the nature of the expenditure, and it is reviewed and initialed by a responsible official. A control test could be, for a sample of GRNs, inspect the detail to confirm whether the nature of the goods is capital or revenue. Then confirm whether the initials of the responsible official are present, and if they have recorded correctly as an asset or expense. Then for assets, confirm they are recorded in the asset register. The next control relates to the internal auditors. It states that they review assets in the register and compare them to assets on site using the serial number. This is carried out periodically to confirm existence. A control test would be to inquire with the internal audit department when the last review took place. If in the current year being audited, review the working papers and reports from it to identify the review happened and appears to be effective. The final control in this scenario is that access to the non-current asset register is restricted through passwords. A control test could be to obtain the list of authorized staff in the finance department and attempt to gain access to the system by using the password of a staff member not on that list. Remember for each control test to be as clear and descriptive as possible. Leave spaces between each on your answer booklet so the marker can clearly see where one test ends and the other begins. Please remember, to be successful in this type of question, we need to plan the approach and ensure we have identified how long is needed for each part. Use headings to introduce your answers and space out your points so it is clear for the marker where the marks can be allocated. Finally, if there is a scenario, use it. This information was given to you for a reason, and at F8 they are trying to see if you can apply your knowledge to a given scenario and not just be able to remember the facts. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and good luck.